Many thanks to Nuvjub, Skillspeeder Gaming, Jaren, DayZ Podcast and Taggy's Tagwise for making this video possible. Ever since the birth of DayZ, the damage of a bullet in flight has always been equal to how much velocity it loses during that time. Well, in DayZ, that hasn't been the case for over 2 years now, making some weapons surprisingly terrible at sniping, and one weapon in particular better than sniper rifles at long distances, even though this weapon is not a sniper rifle itself. Welcome to the strange world of DayZ damage drop-off. As a bullet is fired from a gun in DayZ, it travels through the air and it loses velocity. How much velocity it loses impacts the amount of damage it will inflict on impact. But in DayZ, it also doesn't do that at the same time, so I guess it's a bit like quantum theory, in that if you observe the bullet in flight, it's either lost damage or it hasn't lost damage. To show you what I mean, this is the 5.56 round fired by the M4. It's given a starting speed value in meters per second of 1000 in the game files. This value gets decreased by another value called air friction for bullets under travel time. Now, in a lot of realistic games out there, damage gets reduced as this meters per second value drops, but in DayZ now, it will only start to drop in damage when told to do so by another value in the game files called default damage override, which is given to all ammo types in DayZ. Default damage override determines when damage drop-off should occur, and when it does occur, the rate at which damage gets reduced by. It's all still very confusing, isn't it? But to put it simply, a bullet under travel time gets told by default damage override when damage drop-off should occur. Or a butt gets told when to do, taking DayZ to another level of realism for those of us that can control our bowel movements, especially those that are sat on the toilet watching this. Speaking of which, let me show you an example of a butt getting told to do. Here is the damage of a 5.56 round fired by the M4. It does 55 base damage and is a bullet under travel time that has travelled 100 meters so far. At this time, default damage override hasn't started reducing its damage yet, but as it continues to travel, it hits a point at 330 meters where it starts damage drop off. During this whole time, air friction is slowing the bullet down, yet it maintains maximum damage until it reaches 330 meters, at which point it loses damage fairly rapidly. Now, in the old DayZ and current armor games, damage drop-off happens along a smooth curve like this in relation to its meters per second, which is controlled by its initial speed and also its air friction. However, in DayZ, bullets under travel time maintain their damage until a certain point, then loses damage at a faster rate than this air friction line here to compensate for the time here where it didn't lose damage. Why they've done it like this, I'm not 100% sure, but my guess is that they've probably done it like this to reduce the lag in close quarters firefights due to a lot of quick calculations being issued to the engine. Let me know if you have another theory though. Now, there is a formula for determining when damage drop-off occurs, which was discovered by a Reddit user called Goose, who generously explained how it works to me. Basically, initial speed and default damage override is combined to find the speed at which the round will drop off. In the case of most projectiles in DayZ, that number is 70% of a bullet's initial speed, which for the 5.56 round starting at 1000 meters per second is 700 meters per second. 70% of 1000 is 700. So when the 5.56 round reaches 70% of its starting speed, it begins to drop off, and it drops off roughly twice as fast as this air friction line here, but is again influenced by the default damage override stat. The 5.56 round reaches 700 meters per second or 70% initial speed at 330 meters, but because each ammo type has different stats, such as initial speed and air friction, each ammo type tends to drop off at different distances. Here are all the distances in DayZ they drop off at. So even though the 5.56 round starts as the fastest round in the game at 1000 meters per second, they are in 6th place on this chart, which starts to drop off at 330 meters. This is because the 5.56 round reaches 70% speed faster due to its air friction stat being higher than these 5. Switching back to the previous chart, let's look at the two most powerful sniper rounds in the game, the 308s fired by the Winchester and the 7.62x5.4s fired by the Mosin. They both start life at 110 damage, and the 308s don't start dropping off until 400 meters, then 20 meters after, the Mosin round starts to drop off. The rate they drop off at is strongly impacted by the air friction of these rounds, so because they're almost identical in air friction, initial speed, and default damage drop off, the drop off curve is very similar for these two weapons. The slugs for the shotgun also start life at 110 damage, but due to their insanely high air friction start dropping off at just 60 meters, and again due to their air friction lose damage very quickly, losing half of their damage in just 120 meters. So no, slugs are not good for sniping at all. Other shotgun shells follow suit with their high air friction in DayZ, dropping off early and dropping off very quickly. And yes, rubber shells here start life at 8 base damage, so they do health damage, and as a result can kill players. It's not 0 damage. Just to iterate once again how important air friction is when it comes to damage drop-off, these are the 5.45 by 3.9 rounds fired by the KA-74, which don't start dropping off until they reach 1400 meters. It didn't even fit on my chart here. This means at 850 meters, the KA-74 and KAS-74U do more damage than the Mosin and the Winchester rounds. Also, with the KA-74 you can attach the PSO-1 scope which zeros to 1000 meters, making the KA-74 the best weapon for sniping players at extreme distances. Now while the VSS rounds and VSS armor piercing rounds are good at maintaining their damage over distance, it takes them 3 seconds to travel 850 meters, where the 5.45 by 3.9 rounds fired by the AK-74 reach 850 meters in a little under 1 second. So if you're shooting anything past 850 meters, the KA-74 is the best weapon to use in DayZ, but does come with a little less accuracy than sniper rifles. Moving on to some other high damage rounds, we have the 357s fired by the Repeater, Deagle and Magnum, dropping off very quickly again due to the high air friction. The reason the Repeater is separate is due to its 15% higher initial speed value given to this weapon. Note here that even though they drop off quickly, they follow a similar path to the low air friction rounds of the sniper rifles. This is because the 357 rounds have a different default damage override value, which is 80% instead of 70%. Another round that has a different doo-doo stat is the 22 rounds, making the Sporter 22 drop off sooner at 90% initial speed, but is less affected by the rate at which it loses damage because this stat is now 90%. However, the 357s and 22s are the only rounds in the game that have a different default damage override stat, the rest are set at 70%. Another weapon that fires these Sporter 22 rounds is the MK2, but something different happens with the MK2. It doesn't have 18 damage per shot like the Sporter, they actually do 16.9 damage per shot at 0 meters and start to drop off their damage immediately after being fired, which I think is a bug, and I'll go over that in another video. For now though, I've built a tool on the WOBO tools website that you can use to get the rest of the damage numbers that I've got on this friendly chart, link in the description. I did do other tests relating to damage drop off. I know you guys have a lot of questions when it comes to this stuff, and here are my results. Sawn off weapons don't affect damage drop off, attachments, muzzles, scopes, buttstocks, handguards don't affect damage drop off either, and tracer rounds make no difference to damage drop off. When penetrating surfaces or deflecting bullets in DayZ, the damage a bullet inflicts still follows the same pattern this chart does. Just remember, it's meters per second that determines damage drop-off, not how many meters it's travelled. For example, let's say a .45 round penetrates this door and it loses 60% of its speed. It will also lose 60% of its damage. But if it goes through this door and it only loses 10% of its speed, it will not lose any damage because it hasn't broken this 70% threshold. Another big discovery is that damage drop-off is not affected by armor such as the plate carrier or helmets. This means that armor in DayZ does not impact the velocity or meters per second of a bullet. The only stats that seem to matter when it comes to damage drop-off is the initial speed of a bullet and the air friction of a bullet, which gives us a bullet under travel time, and then you combine that with the default damage override stat that gives us the damage drop-off values seen on this chart. It took over 6 months of gathering data and creating prerequisite charts and interacting with some of the smartest members of the DayZ community to uncover what damage drop-off is and how it behaves in DayZ. So a like and maybe a subscribe would be very much appreciated. And I have to give a massive shout out to Goose on Reddit, who is responsible for discovering the damage drop-off formulas. Without him, this video would not have been possible, so thank you, Goose. If you haven't checked out the WOBO Tools website yet, it is now 100% out of alpha, and you can use the news feed on the website to get the latest news for everything WOBO. It also shows all the initial speed and air friction numbers that you've seen in this video, links below. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know your opinion on damage drop-off in the comments. Is it good or is it doo-doo? And good luck sniping with your KA-74.